Hello everyone! Welcome back to our Python Basic series. Now today we're diving into one of the most fundamental yet powerful data structures in Python known as the tuples. Tuples are a little bit like lists, but they bring something unique to the table, and that is they're immutable. And when we say immutable, it means we can't change them once we have already started to or created them. In this video, we'll walk you through what tuples are, how to create them, and why they're very important in Python programming. So let's begin. Tuples are a sequence of values just like lists. However, unlike lists, they are immutable, meaning we cannot add, modify, or remove any of its elements. Now, why is immutability important? Well, immutability adds that layer of security, especially when you don't want your data being modified accidentally during an execution of a code. Now, to create a tuple, we will enclose the value using a parenthesis instead of a square brackets like in list. Creating tuples in Python is simple. You can create a tuple with multiple elements or even just one. Though, when creating a tuple with a single element, remember to include a comma to differentiate it from a regular value. So let's dive into code and see it in action. So for example, I want to name this variable a tuple underscore. Now let's say it's some string. Without the comma at the end of this code, it will just be a string. So you can verify that. However, if you put in a comma after a regular value, then it would become a tuple. Now, it doesn't need to be a string. It can be, for example, a value, a float. It can still be a tuple, but without the comma, you can verify that it's a float. Or it can be an integer. With comma at the end of that value, it will be a tuple. Now, you can likewise create a tuple from a sequence of values. So let's say, for example, we want to create a list of values. Remember that in order for you to create a list of values or sequence, it has to be encoded or enclosed in a square bracket. So for example, we have 1, 2, 3, and maybe some names here. You can verify that the type of the list of values is that of a list. However, if you enclose this particular sequence of elements in a parenthesis, not square bracket, it will become a tuple. Okay, though the argument is you may want to change already the variable to be a tuple values or simply just tuples. Okay, sorry, so what would be there? Now for tuple assignment, one really cool feature of tuples is Tuple Assignment. This allows you to assign multiple variables at once in a single line of code. So for example, here's how it works. Let's label this Tuple Assignment. Okay, and let's say for example we have three variables, x, y, and z, and you want to simultaneously assign one value per variable of x, y, and z, and you want to maybe assign 1, 5, and 7, for example. Now, if you print x, you get 1. It's being assigned according to its placement here. So the first variable here gets the first number. And of course, if you print y, you get that as well. Or maybe you want z, you get that as well. Now, of course, this is if you're working with a really long code where the function will return two values, this is actually very useful. So let's say, for example, you have also something like the height or the width, or maybe, for example, even the number of rows and columns, and you're working with the pandas data frame. Now, another strength of tuples is that they can be used as return values for functions. So, for example, your function will return multiple values. You can return them as tuples. This is something that lists can do as well, but of course with the added layer of protection of immutability. Okay, so for this example, let's make it a little bit harder and a little bit more realistic by writing a function that will give us the sum, the mean, and the median of a list of values. Now, we want to focus on the tuples lesson, so for this one, we won't be calculating or creating the code from scratch for the mean and median. So, from the statistics module, let's import mean and median. Now, let's write that function. Let's call that function get sum, mean, median, and let our argument or the parameter be just a list of values. All right, now to get the sum, we simply use the built-in function and apply it to the list values. To get the median, or maybe let's try to get the mean first, we use the one that we have imported earlier and apply it directly to the list of values. Same with the median. Now we return sum, mean, median. A quick review: the reason why we are putting underscore at the end of the variable sum, mean, and median, and even here in the tuple, is that these words are built-in functions for Python. That means that they mean something without the underscore. Sum, mean, median, and tuple, they mean a specific thing to Python. And to differentiate that this is a variable that we have customized or we have created for our own purpose, we want to have an additional character that differentiates it from that particular built-in function. Like for example, for this one, this is a built-in function sum, so we don't use it as a variable. So we added the underscore just so Python knows that we are not referring to this built-in function. Now, on to the lesson on tuples again. The return value here is tuples because it's separated by a comma. Remember that even without the parenthesis, as long as it's ending with a comma or it's separated by a comma, that is by default already treated as a tuple. So, for example, we want to apply this function. We get this and apply it to a list of values. Let's say, for example, the list of values that we want is 1, 5, 56, 85, for example. Now, you'll be getting here, see here, the return value is a tuple with 3 elements. The first element being the sum, the second element being the mean, and the third element being the median. Now, if you want to assign it to different variables, all you have to do is, because this one returns 3 value, you can do what we've learned from the previous lesson and maybe just assign it to different variable by doing this. And you know that this variable gets the first return value, this variable gets the second return value, and this variable gets the last value. So you can try it. For example, here, print the sum of the list is, and we print here, sum of the list is 147. Now, just like list, you can access tuple elements using indexing and slicing. You can also use the len function to check how many items are in a tuple. However, because tuples are immutable, operations like appending or deleting items aren't allowed. So, for example, for this one, let's say, for example, we have a my tuple. And you have here 10, 20, 30, and 40. Okay? And you want to index index 1, you remember this is index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. So we will be getting the first index, or rather index 1. Sorry, the first index is index 0. So you should already be aware that the output will be 20. Right? Now, if you want to slice it as well, let's say for example from index 1 to index 3, you can likewise do that, similar with how we've been doing it with the list. So indexing it from index 1 to 3, okay, and yeah, it got index 1 and index 2 because the last number here is always exclusive. And of course, to get the length, just use the len function, which is a built-in function. And there you have it. Now, if you want to test its immutability, let's say, for example, we want to change this to 0. So in a list, for example, you will just index it, for example, first one, and then assign it, for example, the value of 0, and you'll get an error here saying that you can't do that assignment. So tuple does not support item assignment, aka it's not immutable. Now let's explore some built-in functions that work really well with tuples. These are the zip built-in function and the enumerate built-in function. The zip function is incredibly useful when you want to combine two or more sequences into tuples. It takes multiple sequences and zips them together, creating a tuple for each pair of the items. So let's see it in action. So for example here, let's use zip to combine two lists. So let's say for example you have here the students, so we have 3 students and you have their grades. So for example, you have here okay. Now to see the zip function in action and to kind of create a tuple based from these two lists, so we zip in the students and the grades, and here you'll see the output will be as follows. The first element of the first list and the first element of the second list are combined into a tuple. Now here, the result is a list of tuples where each of those tuples contains elements from the corresponding index of the sequences. It's worth noting that if you have two lists and one of those lists, well, is shorter than the other, the length of the output will be that of the shorter one. Now let's go and discuss the enumerate function. The enumerate function is another handy tool. It adds a counter to an iterable and returns it as an enumerated object, which is often a list of tuples. Now this is great when you need both the index and the value of items in sequence. So for example, for this case, for index value in enumerate, and let's say you have a list here of apple, banana, and let's say grapes. Print index and value. So you see here that the output now contains an index and the value that is being iterated upon. So here the apple, the banana, and the we have wrong spelling of grapes. Okay. Now it's worth noting that when you use enumerate, you must have the value here. It's also possible that maybe you just want the value, then you just need to print the value here. And if you just want the index, then you can just get the index here. This is very consistent with what we've learned earlier about tuple assignment. First element in that output is being assigned to the first variable, and the second element in that output is being assigned to this variable. Lastly, let's talk about comparing tuples. In Python, you can use relational operators like less than, greater than, and equals with tuples. the comparison starts with the first element, and if they are equal, it moves to the next, and so on until the difference is found. So let's say, for example, here, so for the comparing tuples, we have here tuple 1. It's 1, 2, 3, and then tuple 2. 1, 3, 2. And we want to determine if T1 is less than T2. This becomes true because, as we've mentioned, the comparison starts with the first element, so they're both 1, and if they're equal, so it moves to the next. So for the next element, we have here 2 and 3, and because T2 now has the greater element, the output becomes that T2 is that of the greater tuple, greater than the T1. So, for example, in this case, if you change the operational sign to be T1 greater than T2, then it wouldn't be true anymore. Now, this is regardless of whether you put here a very large amount of value, for example, here, 300,000, it's still gonna be false because it's going over element per element and then makes that final verdict of comparison once it founds elements that are different from one another, in this case, the second element. You can also sort tuples based on their values. This can be incredibly powerful when working with data collections. So where would you use tuples in real life? Well, they're great for representing fixed collection of values such as coordinates, where you have the latitude and the longitude, or RGB. So we'll be manipulating colors in subsequent lessons. So we'll be using RGB. So that is also in tuple form, or maybe as a return value for functions. So anytime that you need to have data that can't be changed, tuples is your way to go. So let's wrap up with some activities that can solidify your understanding of tuples. So here are some of the challenges. First, remove empty tuples. So for the first activity, create a function that accepts a list of tuples and remove any empty tuples. So from the discussions that we've had, it should be relatively easy. Of course, number 2, sort a list of tuples. So to create a function that sorts a list of tuples containing a string and a float in descending order. And for number 3, group analysis. Given a list of students, grades, and groups, write functions to calculate the sum, mean, and median of grades per group. And that's it for today's video on tuples. I do hope that now you have a better understanding of tuples and how you're going to use them in your Python programs. Don't forget to try out the exercises that we have given earlier, and we will be also posting the exercise or my take on those exercises so that you can check them out for yourselves, and of course check or validate if you've had the same approach. And that's it. Hopefully I'll see you with the next lessons. Thank you.